If it wasn't for Florida and Texas, we might not have ever reopened our economy. If you're an individual, the solution is you run to the place with the least government, figure out where that is, and you run away from the place with the most government, because the most authoritarian government is probably going to choke you to death.
Hey guys, welcome back to Library of Wealth. Today we have Michael Saylor discussing the current Bitcoin market. This occurs at a time when the cryptocurrency market is replicating the projected decline in the stock market. It is reasonable to expect fear in the market, especially in light of the recent hike by the Federal Reserve and the uncertainty surrounding rising costs. Despite the Fear and Greed Index showing widespread instability, MicroStrategy CEO Michael Saylor is still optimistic on Bitcoin. Right now we're hovering just above $19,000, but that price is expected to drop significantly in the next few months. Although Saylor is not surprised by this, it does demonstrate that inflation is still a problem. He says that since excessive money printing is what fuels inflation, central banks would be powerless to stop it. Let's get right into the interview with Michael Saylor, who will give us his take on the current state of the Bitcoin market. If you enjoy the content we do here, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's get right into the video.
If you're an entrepreneur or you're an investor, you have to have a 10-year time horizon. And nothing great is accomplished without a decade. If you look at Microsoft, the company's founded in the mid-70s, a decade later in their mid-80s, if you're not willing to hold Microsoft stock for a decade, you probably didn't get to the point where they came public. So a decade's a short period of time for someone who's an industrialist or an investor. I mean, Warren Buffett still owns Coca-Cola stock, and he must have bought it 50 years ago, right? So I think that anybody that's a billionaire, right? All of these names, the Sergey Brins, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Jeff Bezos, the Elon Musks of the world, they didn't get there without holding an asset that had technical potential for a decade or longer. There's no get-rich-quick scheme. So I think that people want an easy route. If you're trying to get a quick win with no volatility, with no risk, doesn't make sense. And if you're actually trying to be successful in a hurry with volatility, that probably still won't work either. I mean, ultimately, success comes from taking a decade-long view, right? Andrew Mellon, John D. Rockefeller, Jeff Bezos, right? We forget, like, Tesla was founded 20 years ago. Like, people think it's an overnight success, but it's not an overnight success. And with regard to the macro picture, we live in a time of unprecedented public intervention in the affairs of the economy. Right? Unprecedented. We never in the history of the country did you have a government that told you couldn't have Thanksgiving dinner with your family because they didn't want family members to sit too close to each other. Yeah. We arrested a dude on a surfboard in the middle of the Pacific Ocean for basically paddle boarding in the middle of the Pacific because that was deemed as unsafe.
Saylor continues by saying that stablecoins are currently unregistered securities, which puts a twist in that sector, but once regulated, would produce a huge increase in market capital. Big banks are currently unable to initiate stablecoins because of this. Tens of millions of transactions each day would be possible, offering the stock and cryptocurrency markets tremendous potential. However, as the Fed continues to raise interest rates, this will put massive pressure on all markets.
So we have an unprecedented amount of encroachment. We have politicians overriding the free market. They tell you what kind of energy you can use. They tell you, how far you have to sit from someone. They tell you whether it's safe to be sitting in your office at a table next to someone. Lots and lots of encroachment. The government is suppressing the free market. So if the government keeps suppressing the free market everywhere, what you do is you cripple production, right? Yeah. We have tariffs on Chinese imports, right? That drive up prices up or down, drives them up, right? You have a war or a labor war, right? If everybody unionizes and if everybody's afraid to go to work, if everybody thinks that their life is threatened to stand next to another human being, right? And if we're afraid to trade with each other, and if we're afraid to talk with each other, right? If you have capital controls, wage controls, price controls, export controls, manufacturing controls, right? As those things happen, they have a chilling effect on the economy. So what we have right now is, on one hand, you have a supply side problem, right? We're not producing as much. The degree of not producing, by the way, is misunderstood. The currency weakened by 20% in the year after COVID. If the economy measured in nominal terms is flat, that meant that the overall economic output decreased by 20%. The overall economic output decreased by 20% or more in the last 2 years. People wonder if we're in a recession. We've been in recession since March of 2020. But what we have is a situation where all the metrics are distorted. How many people would measure the economy based upon GDP output measured in dollars? Most. Is that the correct measure? No, right? Because the dollar is not worth what it was 24 months ago, right?
What if how would you look at it?
You have to measure it in real terms, or measure it in the actual output of goods and services. For example, how many airline miles got flown, right? If Emirates Airlines grounded half their fleet and decommissioned it after COVID, now they're up and running the part they didn't decommission. How is it possible that the air sector could possibly recover to the point where it was in January of 2020? If you've actually mothballed or decommissioned half the airplanes, right? I could double the price of a ticket. If I double the price of a ticket, I can tell you that the size of the airline industry is the same as it was in January 2020, right? I could declare there's no recession. But the fact is, everything costs twice as much. There's half as much of it, right? I changed the way that I measured it. GDP measured in nominal terms is a gross distortion, and then CPI is a gross distortion. If I have 100 things that you want, and I pick 10 of them, and I measure the increase in the price of 10, and I ignore the price in the other 90, I can show you CPI is 8%, right? 8.3% is the number this morning. But the actual inflation rate is higher, but it's inflation on something, it's inflation on something you want, but I'm not going to choose to measure. For example, the 30-year bond is traded up to 350 basis points, and it was 180. Right? Mortgages have doubled. So mortgages have doubled. Housing prices are up 35%. And that means in theory, the cost for you to actually buy a home is going to be 50, 60% higher. But ultimately, what you have is an economy that's distorted. There are some things we produce more of, and there are some things we produce less of. And we have flexibility with what we choose to measure. The monetary intervention is the government basically, if I put everybody under home arrest for a year, it's going to be a problem for the economy, right? I mean, if I shut down, they did it in New Zealand, they did it in Australia, they did it in Canada, they kind of did it in certain states in the US. If I do that, that cripples the economy. So while I'm doing that, then if I go ahead and I pump a lot of money in the system, right, then maybe I create a wealth effect and I can say, well, we're recovering. But ultimately, you never recover from the fact that nobody went to school for a year and nobody, went to work for a year, right? You've lost that forever. You're just not measuring it.
According to Saylor, raising interest rates is one strategy, but the real inflation rate, which they won't disclose, is 2 to 3 times higher. The money printing is just one of several variables that are contributing to the increase and the devaluation of currencies. If you're in an inflationary climate, one of the methods Saylor advises is to turn weak property into strong property. However, it's not as simple as leaving the country. That currency may just as well lose value in those nations as well, and you would suffer a huge loss. Because of the value it possesses, Saylor stands by the fact that Bitcoin is the strongest resource in recorded existence. We'll be keeping an eye on this. Comment down below on what you think of Michael Saylor's interview on Bitcoin. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This is Library of Wealth. We'll see you in the next video.